overlap.
I know Bob, I thought he resigned before.
And then maybe. We're going to call this meeting to order. Thank you everyone for coming to the Muscatine City Council in-depth meeting, December 13th, 2018. Cinda, will you please do the roll call?
Councilmember Spread?
Present.
Harvey?
Present.
Brockert?
Present.
Saucedo?
Present.
Brackett?
Present.
Fitzgerald?
Present.
Malcolm?
Present.
7 present, 0 absent, Your Honor.
Thank you. This is the in-depth meeting, so we dispense with some of the formalities. We're going to get right into the agenda. We're going to start with a discussion on Grandview Avenue. So it looks like Brian's getting up.
Mayor and Council, thank you. Good evening. I just want to do a brief introduction. So we've brought our consultants in from Bolton and Mank and HDR. So I have Greg Broussard from Bolton and Mank and Joe Spradling from HDR, and they will walk us through the Grandview update.
Thank you.
Council, thank you.
Welcome.
Obviously, I'm not Jim Harbaugh. You're used to seeing Jim. He is at a kids' band concert tonight. So I'm here. I've been actively involved with both Mississippi Drive and Grandview, so know the project in and out. So tonight, what we're going to do is kind of just do a project update, where we're at with Grandview, and how we go forward.
Thank you.
So wanted to kind of review our project team and who we're working with on this project. So we've got the city, Muscatine Power and Water, ourselves, HDR, but then we've also got a lot of other partners that we've been working with, the DOT, the DNR, Alliant Energy, CenturyLink, and some of the other private utilities out there as well. So what is the Grandview project? Where's our scope? Where's the project at? So that's what this one covers. So we're going to be going from the Highway 69 bypass to Pearl Street. One of the things that from the Highway 61 bypass, sorry, all the way to Hauser, that's going to be more of soft improvements. We're going to be doing some trees, some screening, some trail crossings. Then the major road improvements go from Hauser to Pearl Street. So where are we at in the process? I think the last time we were here was about the middle of summer, and we were working on that final design. That has now proceeded through that final design. The 90% plans were submitted to the DOT on Tuesday, so now we are waiting for their comments, working on the jurisdictional approvals, working with DNR on their approvals. Once we start getting those approvals back, the next step will be going into the bidding and the letting of the project, ultimately going towards the construction in 2019. One of the things that we've talked about from Grandview for the whole process was how it related to Mississippi Drive. There's some aspects where it's very similar to Mississippi Drive and some aspects where it's very different. Some of the places where we're similar is we've got very similar traffic volumes as we look at the traffic as it proceeds down Mississippi Drive, around Carver Corner, and then down to Grandview. Those traffic volumes stay very similar. The goals of both the projects look towards enhanced pedestrian opportunities, ways to kind of increase the space between the traffic and the pedestrians, whether it's bikes, walkers, just to be able to provide a little bit more safety there. We're going to be looking at incorporating some of the architectural, some of the streetscape items from Mississippi Drive where logical. There won't be nearly as much as there was on Mississippi Drive. It'll be a reduced or a pulled back effort on that. And then they're both similar because we're going to be replacing aging infrastructure and updating the pavement as well. Some of the places that were different from Mississippi Drive, as I referred to earlier, there's a lot less decorative elements on it. We picked and chose based on space and kind of where some of the critical crossings, where some of those decorative elements went. As you go down Mississippi Drive, there is that center median down through there. With Grandview, that center median will not be there. We're going to have one lane in each direction with a center turn lane. One of the reasons that we're looking at that is just because of the broad mix of land uses. We have commercial, residential, industrial, and then with all of those different land uses, we have a lot of curb cuts, which really lends that center turn lane to being a safe and efficient method to get the traffic in and out of all those curb cuts. And we do have a higher speed as well. We're looking at a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit compared to 25 through Mississippi Drive. we went through a lot of this before the project goals, so I'm not going to go through all of these. Just kind of wanted to, these are always in our mind as we're designing, making sure that the goals that have been set forth for the project, that we're meeting those, that we're going to be implementing a community-supported project with technically sound design as well. Into a little bit of the details. So what I've got shown here is what the roadway looks like today in existing condition. The top one is from Hauser to Day Street. We're a 2-lane roadway we've got really wide shoulders, more of a rural feel. We've got ditches. And then about Day Street, we start between Day and White. We start transitioning from the two-way street to the 4-way street. And then we have that from Day to Pearl, where we've got reduced lane widths through there. They're tight lanes. We've got pedestrians right against the roadway. So that's what the existing section looks like. So taking some of the goals we had for the project, what's the new section going to look like? And that's this one. So that is a couple things to point out. So we've got 3 lanes of traffic, 1 northbound, 1 southbound, and a center left turn lane. We have taken those lanes and we've widened them. Right now, the lanes are about 11 feet, and we show 11 foot, plus we've got a 2-foot curb and gutter, so we're essentially widening those lanes by a couple feet, give a little bit the feel of a wider roadway, a little bit easier for driving. But then with those curbs, it also is going to help through what is currently the rural section. It's going to help slow that section down a little bit. We're not going to change the speed limit. Just by the feel of the roadway, we're going to help slow that down because there's going to be curbs. We're not going to have wide shoulders. Traffic's going to naturally the curb is going to be a naturally traffic calming device. And then we've got large buffers as well. Not large, but larger buffers. We've got a minimum of usually 6 foot between the roadway and the sidewalk. So that way we're giving those pedestrians a little bit more safety as they're traversing throughout the corridor. Some of the places that we were able to bring in some of those softscape elements, this is I'll talk through 3 locations of them. This is the first one. This is the Warren, Oregon intersection. So down on the bottom left corner of the screen, that's where the new Dollar General is to help you kind of get an orientation on this. Some of the things that we're doing here is we're creating a trail connection. There's the trail that's going to be running through this intersection will go through Warren and then onto Liberty as well and connect to the new trail that's on Liberty. And then it will be heading over the railroad tracks on Oregon and connecting to the trail that's on the other side of Oregon as well. So we're creating a lot of pedestrian route connectivity throughout this intersection. And with that, in the right half of the screen there, we've got kind of an enhanced pedestrian area. We're going to have a kiosk there. That kiosk will be similar to what we've seen on Mississippi Drive as far as design, function. We'll have some bike parking there. We'll have some benches. So that's kind of one of the areas that some of the amenities and some of the softscape features from the Mississippi Drive project made sense to put for that one. So this one, to give you a graphical location, we are south of Hauser, and the building that's shown right there is Mr. Sippy's. So it's going to be creating a new trail crossing through here, so that way we connect to the trail that runs parallel with the railroad track, gives us a place to traverse Grandview right there. And we will have an RRFB, which is I always forget, rapid rectangular flashing beacon. So essentially you have a pedestrian that comes up, wants to cross, they can push a button, you'll get your flashing lights so that way cars can see that, and it provides them a safe opportunity to cross that. And with this crossing down at this location, we'll also have a couple of gateway monuments to kind of really start introducing drivers to the corridor, along with some trees on there as well. The last intersection that I want to talk through is the Hauser intersection. We've looked at lots of different options here. I think we've looked at roundabouts, we've looked at signals, we looked at stop signs. So this is the configuration that is going to be proceeded forward with. Walking through a little bit of the history of the roundabout that we looked at, we decided that based on just the amount of space it would take, the size, the cost, and that the safety implications, it just wasn't warranted to go to the roundabout option. We looked at signals, and because right now that is a signaled intersection, the traffic study shows that that intersection and the amount of volume, the turning, the pedestrian movements doesn't warrant a new signal being put in there. So the existing signal will be coming down. That was put in many years ago as part of a construction project, and then it just never got taken down. So that signal will be taken down and will be going to stop signs at this intersection. One of the things to notice is down on the bottom, you'll see some of those semi-trucks. The existing has room for about 3 trucks when there's a train to fully stack in through there. We're providing room for over 6 trucks, almost 7 right now. So we've really increased that queue distance. Done that through the use of changing some of the alignment, how that road runs, adding right turn lanes, adding through lanes, so that way even if there are cars stopped waiting for that, the traffic on Grandview can still get through. And then some of the hardscape, some of the sign elements, some of the monuments that were on Mississippi Drive, we'll be implementing those in a couple of different locations throughout the corridor as well. We'll have one at the trail crossing at Mississippi's. That'll be some gateway monuments. At the Oregon intersection, we'll have a kiosk. Those are the 2 prime locations. We looked at a couple other ones, but due to space and some large on the south and some large natural gas mains, we just weren't able to find a place for those. So those are the 2 locations where we'll have some of those hardscape items. One of the other things we looked at was how to handle stormwater for this project. Traditionally, if you drive Grandview right now, it's a very flat roadway. It doesn't have a lot of elevation change. So we'll be adding a little bit more elevation change to it just to help us be able to control some of that stormwater. From Hauser to Briar's Ditch, we have a wider right-of-way there. The right-of-way widens by about 25 to 30 feet, depending upon where we're at. So through that section, we're going to be looking at adding, keeping the rural ditches, keeping the ditch feel, except for we're going to be improving those. We're going to be looking at doing some native grasses in there. We've worked with Brian and with the Parks Department on what the grasses are that need to be in there to help clean some of that water as it goes through there. We're also improving the size of the ditches, so we can now hold quite a bit more storm than we ever could before. So right now a lot of the water that when it rains, it just goes off the roadway and it proceeds towards the private properties. We're not going to be able to hold all that water that lands on the roadway and reduce some of the flooding down and through this area as well. One of the other things that we're looking at is we wanted to look at, are there other places we can introduce some of these green infrastructure where it makes sense? Because we don't want to put them where it doesn't make sense. And Bleecker was a great opportunity. There's existing storm sewer at Bleecker. The corner really set itself up to have a rain garden there because of the grading, because of the storm sewer. So at Bleecker, we are proposing to show 2 rain gardens, one on each side of the intersection there. And what those rain gardens will be, it'll look kind of like kind of in the bump outs that are Mississippi Drive, but it'll be a depressed area where we've got nice native grasses, we've got some mulch in there, we've got a storm outlet, so that way it'll fill up, get pond about maybe at most about 9 inches, get into that outlet and then flow out. And what that does is it helps provide some water quality features as well. We wanted to implement some of that in where it made the most sense throughout the project. I know one of the things that council's got questions on also is the staging, construction, timing. How are we going to do this? And I'm going to let Joe kind of walk through some of that from HDR.
Thanks, Greg. Mayor and council. I'll just talk real briefly about kind of the construction staging and phasing of the project. So all the improvements that Greg just talked about will be phased over a 2-year construction period. We're going to have multiple phases to minimize impact. So we will be maintaining traffic throughout construction. So we'll build all these improvements. Typically, we construct on one half of the road and then maintain traffic on the other half of the road, flip that around. On the new improvements, we'd run traffic and then reconstruct the other half. We're trying to minimize, road closures as much as possible. We don't want to interrupt, access to residences, access to businesses, try to minimize those disruptions as much as possible. So we will have 2 road closures though, and I'll show that on the map here in just a minute. And as Greg said, we've submitted plans to the DOT. We are on schedule to start construction in 2019. So if you take a look at the map up here, generally speaking, we would construct the northern half of the project in 2019 construction season. and then we'd move to the southern half in 2020 construction season. So you can see that 2019 is in yellow, the kind of magenta is in 2020. The two locations where we'll have some short-term road closures, one is at Briars Ditch. That will occur at the same time that we close down the road at the railroad, the Canadian Pacific Railroad. Those will both occur in year 2020. Those are needed really to reconstruct Briars Ditch with all the culverts and maintain drainage through that area. And then at the railroad, we're reconstructing the railroad roadway approaches, so we need to close those down short term. Those will actually happen at the same time, so we won't have two separate closures. It'll be one closure with alternate routes and a detour at that time. So throughout construction, the 2 years of construction, like I said, we're going to maintain local access along the corridor. So that will be, any businesses, residents, there'll be access maintained throughout construction. But we are asking the through traffic, kind of in and out of downtown, kind of through the town to use this detour route that I show here. So that will utilize, it's in the green, and so it'll utilize the US 61 bypass up to Hershey, cut over on Hershey and over to Carver Corner. So this will help carry all your through traffic, your trucks, we'll have your through cars, and will kind of alleviate some of the congestion that we might have in the construction area. But again, we are going to be maintaining that local access traffic. And generally, the south half of the project will have one lane of travel, so it'll be one way, one lane. And then the north half of the project, north of Oregon, will have one lane in each direction. And that northern half is where you have more of the commercial, retail, a lot of the turnover in traffic. So we're maintaining an additional capacity throughout construction on that project, or on that part of the project. So I think Greg's going to come back and talk about the next steps in the project.
Thanks, Joe. So where do we go from here? What are the next steps? So like I said, on Tuesday, we submitted the 90% plans to the DOT. I have been in discussions with them yesterday and today. They're starting to look at those plans. And then we need to look for approval from the DOT. And an approval is going to mean we're going to need our plans, our specifications. There are some easements, there's some right-of-way needs. All of those items and the permitting all have to be done for the DOT to sign off to approve us to proceed forward to bidding. Once we've got their approval, then the final plans and specifications will be signed and sent to the DOT with the funding that is through this project. The DOT is bidding the project, so they'll take care of all the bidding and all of that side of it. And then once we've bid it, then we'll start looking at construction, which is 2 years of anticipated construction. That's kind of the next steps. And what I wanted to do was just open it up. What questions? What do you guys want to know?
Greg, one thing, it appears to me that what we have done here is flip-flop the 2 years. We were planning to start at the Dick Drake and work our way up in 19 and then go on up from Oregon to Pearl.
Yep.
In 20, and now we're going to do Pearl to Oregon and then Oregon.
Yep. Those were flipped because as we started looking at how we do those phases and we got into some of the detailed design, there's a couple different things just by trying to make 2019 and 2020 have the same number of working days and how we could split that project to get the same number of days. We're going to be splitting it just south of Musser.
Okay.
And if we split it there to make the working days even, we had to flip the stages because the sanitary sewer wouldn't drain from the first year to the second year because we're making some elevation changes. So that's why we had to flip those
Okay,
between
thank
the years.
you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any questions?
I had,
Go ahead.
on your detour, we redid Hershey Avenue several years ago. Did we build that to where it can handle the truck traffic that I'm assuming you're going to be having on there?
Yeah, that's something that's been vetted through city staff, and they're comfortable with that serving as a temporary truck route for those 2 years of construction on Hershey.
And the other question I've been discussion with a couple people that are bowlers, and there's a state bowling contest this next year.
Yep.
Major one, I guess. I'm not a bowler, but that was being stressed to me
Yeah,
on numerous occasions.
they only have one entrance too.
Yeah.
So we are maintaining that entrance throughout construction, so they should have access to come in and out during the bowling tournament. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the bowling tournament ends in late June. And so any construction that'll occur will occur after that time. So if it's from February to June, there shouldn't really be any construction in that area. So it should minimize disruption to the bowling alley and the tournament.
Well, maintaining access and having the kind of traffic that they have coming through there is a little different.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm pretty sure if it's February, I think it's February to through June.
yeah, I
And-
think you're right.
Yeah, and I don't think we have any construction really proposed during
Okay.
that time, so it should be basically like the existing condition that's out there today.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Councilman?
Yeah, previously we've discussed projects going on, and the suggestion came up about having a flag man, since you're saying you're gonna reduce it to one lane for local traffic. Is there gonna be a flagging person or those temporary lights like we see sometimes the DOT puts up to allow people to transverse back and forth?
Yeah, absolutely. So flaggers are required anytime the contractor is entering and exiting the work area into live traffic. So this project, since it will be let by the DOT, is following Iowa DOT standards and specifications. And so that is one of the requirements, that they'll have to have a flagger to
Or-
flag in and flag out and
or-
help control traffic.
Or that temporary light, they have a red light and let people go down, and then afterwards the light change and let people come the other direction.
Yeah, we don't have any temporary lights. The only thing that we would have is the always stop at Hauser, which will help regulate traffic. And then otherwise it would be a flagger. That would be the state requirement for them during construction. And then maybe one point of clarification, the traffic in the one lane configuration will only be going northbound. So there will be no opposing traffic going southbound.
Okay.
So it should be fairly minimal traffic.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I have a couple comments, questions. If you back up to the one that says Grandview Avenue green infrastructure. I noticed there's no curb shown. Is that intentionally no curbs?
There will be curbs, they're just, the graphic doesn't have the curb in it.
And then addition to that comment, I guess, is you only have a 4-foot shoulder. Granted, there's a curb there now, but it's just 2 lanes. It doesn't give much room for anybody to pull off to the side, if they have car trouble, for instance.
I
And I
think-
just wondered if,
Yeah,
Can you
so
address that?
that's definitely a valid question. So throughout the whole section, we'll have the center turn lane. So hopefully if there is somebody that does have maybe there's an accident, or maybe somebody that is having car trouble and they can't get to a driveway, there's a lot of driveways that hopefully they could be able to get to a driveway, pull off, address their situation. If they can't, then we would have that center turn lane. And I apologize, this graphic is mainly for showing the ditch is. It doesn't have that center turn lane. That center turn lane would be in this section. So we would have a center turn lane. If somebody is having trouble, you could go around them in the center
Okay.
turn lane.
and then go up to the Hauser Street intersection. Based on my driving experience, I guess, the thing that concerns me here is that median that's on the right-hand side that leads to the railroad tracks. The way it's drawn there, if that's a raised medium, it's gonna really hinder traffic that's coming down Grandview from turning onto toward the railroad tracks, because the nose of that medium sticks out and it's gonna be impeding traffic.
Oh, I know what you're talking
So
about.
with that intersection, we have run full turning movements with everything that's going to be going through there, whether it be pedestrian or passenger cars, all the way up to a full over-the-road semi. And we can make that turn. And we had that same concern over what happens if a semi doesn't make the perfect turn. How do we do that? So that median is going to be, its curbs aren't going to be standard curbs. They're going to be very sloped. So that way they can take a truck going over them, and the pavement that's in them is reinforced. It's thicker than the pavement that would be in a normal median, specifically to be able to handle in case there is a large truck that doesn't, maybe the driver doesn't know he's supposed to turn or takes that out late, that way it can handle that. But a traditional over-the-road truck will make that turn
'Cause
without
that-
getting into the median.
Because the median strip that's down there existing now has irritated the truckers and other people.
Yes.
Yeah, and so if you look at,
Yes.
you can't see it on here, but if we were to superimpose that existing median, it would be quite a bit further out in the intersection.
Okay.
Is there a reason why that median couldn't be curved a little bit more to where it kind of divides the road in two so that there's more in the,
More in the
more
north
in the,
half.
yeah, so that it's divided the lanes kind of 50-50 instead
So the
of-
reason that there's more on the north side is because of when you get a semi that's potentially going westbound, or going left on Sampson and wants to turn and go on Grandview, go up on Grandview, he's got to have that whole pavement to be able to turn, because that's a really tight intersection. So that's why there's more pavement on that north side, to be able to facilitate those truck movements that are going to be headed from Sampson onto Grandview.
Looks like there's a pretty generous radius there, you know.
By the time they try to turn and not as they turn and not get into that center turn lane, that radius needs to be bigger to make sure that way they're not potentially having a conflict point with whether it's a truck or a car that wants to turn onto Sampson from Grandview.
Now, if you picture yourself driving that gray car that's at the top, wanting to turn on Sampson, you can see how that median makes him turn more than 90 degrees, actually, you know.
Yep.
And
And one of
there
the
are
things-
intersections that we have to do that on, and they are so irritating.
And I agree. And one of the things that you can't really see on here is that we've actually changed the alignment of Sampson a little more to try to get it, because ideally we would have a 90-degree intersection. But because of the railroad location and with the lumberyard right there, we just can't have that. So we have adjusted that alignment to get us closer to 90 than we are existing. So we are actually improving that intersection from what it is today as far as the angle of the two roadways and how they interact with each other.
The fact that your curb is really low enough, so if you can jump the curb if you have to, so to speak, that helps. If that was a
Yep.
solid 4-inch,
Yeah.
That would be-
Yep.
Could you send us a picture of the current one that superimposed over that one?
Yes.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
yeah,
Some-
one.
Okay, go ahead,
On
Al.
the Warren Street intersection. Maybe you don't go into that detail there, but the placement of the traffic lights, I'm wondering, the person that's on Oregon Street, where is his traffic light?
Yeah, so it is, there's a cords, it's not come and go, it's the White Oak Station now. There's a little yellow dot there that's where its signal base would be with its mast arm headed out over Warren. So that way the person on Oregon would be directly across from them.
So he has to look clear
Across-
across, yeah.
Yep, across the
Because-
street.
That's good in some instances, I guess. What you hate to do is get behind a semi and you pull up behind him, and then you can't see any traffic lights, you know. But, so that may happen there, I can see, you know, because that would be, there's not gonna be a matching traffic light on that sweep corner for the Oregon.
I think that's where it is now. It's on the opposing side. I had a question about this too, okay. I'm just, is that green space there on next to the White Oak parking lot?
Yes, that is green space. Essentially, right now, they have one continuous curb cut along their entire property. We have been in contact, the city, I think Jim Edgemont has been working with them on this design, and the fact that we're going to be, their driveway on this side will now be the alley, and they'll be accessing it through there, so.
So,
And what that does is, because essentially what we're trying to do is eliminate the ability of a car to enter anywhere they want on Warren Street,
Right.
taking them down to a single location, reduce those conflict points for safety purposes.
and what about on Grandview? Because, I mean, right now, really, the way that they're set up, it's pretty much a continuous curb
So
cut
they will
all
have,
the way
you
around
can't
the
see it
whole-
in here, but there will be just a single entrance on just further right off the screen. And we've been working with Jim and with White Oak to make sure that we're setting up for when they get fuel trucks in and how they're going to maneuver and how that functions to make sure that they can still function as well too. But
Okay.
that intersection, they will have a dedicated driveway as well.
All right, well, as long as they're being involved in that heavily, because that parking lot right now, even with the continuous curb cut, I'm trying to imagine utilizing it with a curb all the way, or, mostly around the whole thing, and I'm honestly not looking forward to utilizing that location for anything, with curbs all around it, so.
Yeah, I have a comment on the Hershey Avenue detour. I have lived on Hershey Avenue. My son and his wife have a home on Hershey Avenue. There's a lot of on-street parking on Hershey, and I can see that being a nightmare. For those residents trying to get in and out, away from their homes to go to work and all of their other activities. Have you thought of putting in any extra stop signs, for instance, at Clinton Street, so that people are coming up off of Clinton Street don't have to take their life in their hands and looking to make sure that nothing's coming before they pull out onto
Yeah,
Hershey?
that's certainly something we can look at. We have not looked at that to date. I would say that you're not going to see the level of traffic that you see on Grandview today on that route, because you'll still have through traffic on Grandview throughout construction. So there will still be people that travel through the construction area.
Right.
And then also through traffic that's just trying to get through Muscatine will take the bypass all the way around town. So I think what you'll mostly see are people that are trying to get to and from downtown using that route. So we don't anticipate a lot of traffic on that, and it certainly would be much less than what you're seeing on Grandview today.
Right, but then my point is, it's already a busy intersection, a busy thoroughfare. There's a lot of on-street parking and, there's
Right.
not a lot of
Did we look at that as part of the
driveways.
traffic study at all, or did that
I don't think
with the detour route?
And we can definitely, if that's a concern, we can definitely look at those intersections and look at what other items we can potentially do during the detour to help those local residents and to help make sure that the detour still maintains traffic while we're helping the existing residents and people who are using that roadway.
Thank
I
you,
would share
appreciate
that
that.
concern as well, so I agree with Nadine on that.
Hey, Nadine, you specifically mentioned Clinton Street, but why not Taylor or Grove or any of the others? I don't know.
Well, I don't know, because Clinton comes up the hill, it's got the steepest incline as far as getting to the top of Hershey.
Okay.
Yeah, Taylor's more or less flat with it.
Yeah, that's a really good comment, so yeah, we'll take a look at that.
Thank you. Alan.
I have a couple more questions. You gonna have sidewalks on both sides? Say
Yes.
from Oregon Street north, there'll be sidewalks on both sides?
There will be sidewalks on both sides of the project the entire length.
Okay, what about in the Warren, Oregon Street intersection? You don't show really,
Whoops. There we go.
There
there
you
you go.
So the one, so yes, so
You don't show the one.
That is, there's a couple locations because of at Day Street. So we'll have two sidewalks up to Day Street. At Day Street, we're crossing over because of the conflict with trying to add an additional pedestrian crossing on the railroad. If we had to add, right now they've got enough space with existing panels that are already out that we can utilize for the crossing. We don't have to put any extra panels in. Those panels are each panel is about $12,000, and so we're moving the pedestrians over, and then we also have reduced right-of-way on the other side. So we're moving the pedestrians over to the side of like where Happy Joe's is right now. They'll go over there, they'll go down to this intersection, and then they can get back across. One of the other reasons we're not bringing them right back at like White Street is because the right-of-way there is so tight. We've got extra right-of-way on next to Dollar General compared to like across the street for the landscape place. We don't, at the landscape and the car wash, there's not room to put a sidewalk in on that side. So yes, we have two sidewalks for the majority of the project. This would be the location where we don't.
Would you say that railroad crossing near the dollar store is the tightest point you have?
Yes, definitely. And some of the other things is if we tried to put another pedestrian on both sides, we'd have to work with the CP. They thought they'd even have to move some of their arms. So to be able to make traffic fit inside the right-of-way, we were trying to avoid that.
You know, does the right-of-way actually narrow there, or is it just the crossing that is so narrow?
The
Could the
crossing,
crossing be-
the right-of-way is the same width through there, the crossing just is narrow, and so if we tried to take sidewalks fully through there, we would be looking at, potentially adding those panels, we would be looking at moving or adding new signals, and so the direction we were proceeded with was trying to minimize those costs and just take them to one side.
Could your design be flexible enough where if you put it in that way and then decided that crossing ought to be wider,
Yep.
you know, you'd have whatever
Yeah, if
cuts you need?
yeah, if it gets in, the ability to add it would be easy to incorporate.
Just, and I think Greg mentioned this before, but just one other thing to point out at Warren, I mean, the trail that's coming down, that is a shared use path. So it actually is, I believe, 10 feet wide.
Yep.
So that's double the typical sidewalk width. So you can see that coming down Warren, crossing the west leg of Warren, north leg of Grandview, and then continuing on to the east. So a little bit wider, better pedestrian accommodation through there.
Were you done?
Yes.
Okay,
thank you.
Councilman Salcedo has some questions.
So I got a few questions. I don't know if you could be able to answer them all, but what infrastructure will be replaced? You mentioned earlier that you knew that some drainage was
Yeah.
going to be replaced, so.
So all of the storm sewer along the entire project will be replaced. Water main is in pretty good shape. There'll be some certain locations where MPW, we're partnering with them. That's actually a good point to bring up. They're gonna be doing a bunch of their work ahead of our project. They're gonna be doing some water main lowerings. They're going to be replacing some hydrants. And so prior to our construction, you're gonna start to see some of the other, because MPW is gonna do some, Liant has some utilities in the way that they're gonna be moving. We've been working with them on adjusting some of their facilities, and then CenturyLink will be moving some of their stuff as well. So prior to construction, we're gonna see some construction from those utility companies. And then we've worked with Matt Chandler on the sanitary sewer, and we're gonna be replacing from Briar's Ditch to about Happy Joe to Day Street. Right now, there are 2 sanitary sewers that run down both sides of the street. We're gonna be putting those into one that runs down the center of the street.
Okay.
So the rest of the sanitary, the city feels like is in good shape, and Matt does a great job of maintaining that and really tracking when stuff needs to be repaired.
The entire pavement will be reconstructed as well.
Okay.
So that's all new.
Another question, you know, we'd asked about sidewalks. I would like to see a full map of what you're doing from the point, from Warren Street, I think it is, all the way
Yeah.
to 61, so I can see where the sidewalks are at, basically what size you're doing.
Yeah. And
everything
I
like
do
that.
have some sets of
We can
plans I
just
brought
get a
with me
full,
too. That if
a
you
full
guys-
map that kind of identifies it, so we're all on the same page. Another question. When you're saying in multiple years, are we gonna do this one full bid? One contractor gets the whole thing for
Yep,
both
that's
years?
that's the concept, is one contractor gets it, they do the construction over 2 years.
You said days, how many days per year are you expecting to work for each year?
So we'll probably be doing a working day contract, so they would have, anytime there's good weather, they can actually get work done. I think we're in about the 100-day range for each year. And that's a pretty typical construction season when you start to take into account inclement weather. So that's typically what they can do in a year. So I think we're just over 100 in maybe the first year, and then 90 in the second year.
Linear footage wise compared to Grandview, can Mississippi Drive?
Oh, linear footage, like the length of the project?
Yes.
So I'll just say, I think we're at about 2.1 miles
Yep.
for this project, and I think Mississippi Drive was maybe a mile.
1.2?
1.2.
So it's about an extra mile.
less. Yeah, or a mile more for this one. Yep.
So this is a mile longer, and we're still doing infrastructure that we thought that wasn't gonna take us longer, and yet we think we're gonna do it in a year less?
So one of the reasons we think that is because of, as we talk through the reduction of all of the decorative items, we're not gonna have, every street's not gonna have crosswalk pavers. We've got them at Warren and we've got them at House. Those are the only places. It's some of those fine details that require a lot of extra time. We're not gonna have all of the parking along the street. We're not gonna have the medians to pour. It's gonna be a lot easier for the contractor to go through, put utilities in, come right behind with the paver, and just keep moving at a faster pace.
really, just generally speaking, this is a much less complex project to construct.
The only
than
challenge that
downtown.
I would tend to disagree with you on is the fact that you were just mentioned about 4 different entities that are already working together on top of each other in a sense, and your timing is gonna be a challenge to be able to say that we're gonna pull that all off.
Yeah, I can gladly go over that. So, we've been having, now we've turned to bi-weekly meetings with the city, MPW, to talk through this coordination and when stuff's gonna start. We're anticipating based on MPW schedule, they're gonna be done 2 to 2.5 months ahead of our project, even potentially beginning to start. Alliant is moving their stuff this year. And CenturyLink has some small cable lines that we're talking through with Bob Wagner, our contact with CenturyLink. It can be done before or after the project. So
So when you're saying that they're doing it this year, are they digging it, or are they
So
doing some sort of-
CenturyLink is moving, not CenturyLink, Alliant at Happy Joe's. They have a large, you can't see it, there's a concrete pad in the Lewis Brothers parking lot that has a bunch of gas meters underneath of it and a bunch of gas valves. They're gonna be reconstructing that and relocating those valves to just north of Happy Joe's, adjacent to the railroad track. That's their major work they're doing. And then we'll coordinate with them during construction, because if we're doing a sanitary crossing or something and a gas main has to be lowered, we'll coordinate during construction. But they're getting everything we know of out of the way this year is what we've been told by them. As far as their schedule and when that will happen, I don't know. I know they've got it in their schedule for this year. What they're doing, it's not a lot of open cut. They'll bore a lot of their lines, so they'll dig a hole at one end, dig a hole at the other end, and just push the pipe between them underground.
Okay, that's what I was at.
Yeah.
So my last question then for you is, when you mentioned you're accessing for the roads and we're gonna try to ultimately not completely shut the whole road down, which is a big concern for me from what we had in this last project. The other concern for me is businesses that are on these roads. Will they be able to still have access even though you're gonna be accessing one side of the road? Will the companies that are locally on these Grandview roads always have access, or will there be times that could be a month, 2 weeks, 3 months?
They'll always have access. Even if the construction's on their side of the road, we'll provide, we have temporary granular access, so there'll be ramps essentially that will be built. It's not gonna be perfect, but they'll at least maintain one lane in and out of each business.
Okay.
So that'll be, we kinda call that sub-staging by the contractor. So we have quantity and bid items for that. So yes, that it'll be maintained at all times.
And you have already started your estimating?
Yep. One thing just to kind of note on the access, I think there are a couple locations where we're providing access from the alleyway.
Yep.
So there could be a portion of their existing driveway closed, but they can still have public access
That's fine.
to their property
I just
from the
wanna
back.
make sure that they don't have a business that's all of a sudden, hey, there are 3 months, nobody's able to access their place because our project basically took their whole driveway.
We're very one of our main charges was to try to minimize disruption to businesses, so that's how this whole staging plan came together, so, yeah, very important to us.
Just important for me, I wanna see the map, I wanna see the whole thing from one side to the other, so if we can get that, Greg.
Yep, we can easily get that for you.
So let's do a scroll plot with the whole thing, so you can see it all at once.
Councilman Brackett has some questions.
So, yeah, and kind of to tail on to what Santos was saying, one of the things that I've heard from business owners in the downtown area is that the Mississippi Drive project significantly impacted in a negative way their businesses. And so I just expressed concern that we keep that in mind with the remainder of the project. Also, one of the other comments that I frequently received during the Mississippi Drive reconstruction was, where are they? And so there'd be nice, beautiful days, lots of days, and a lot of work left to do, and you wouldn't see anybody doing anything. And so I don't know if that was something that they just were off working somewhere else. If there was, and it's not like the answer of, well, they had underground work to do, because I would look for that as well. So but there'd be no one out there doing anything, and that just gives an impression to the community that it's not really that important to get done in a timely. The community's convenience is not important. So
It's a perception.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. And we try to manage some of that through our contract. Joe was talking about the working days, so we'll tell them, here's how many working days you have to do the project. He was talking, so we're looking at maybe about 100 each year. So we'll ultimately work through that with the contractor. He'll have so many days to do it, and we'll work through with the city also, as well as if there's days when they should be out there working and they're not, they're gonna get charged. So some of that will keep them accountable.
Okay.
Ultimately, if the contractor thinks we estimate that to the best of our ability based on our experience, how many days that'll take. He may know he's going over and be okay with it because he has to get another project done. That's outside of our control.
Sure. So, and I just kind of back on that a little bit, is the impression that kind of I got anyway was that, well, they had a final deadline date that they had to get done by, and they stuck to that, even though maybe there was a lot of room to finish early, which would have been nice, particularly for businesses that were losing customers. So, just if we can keep that in mind on this and make sure that maybe we don't, that, like you said, that there's some kind of pressure up front to finish sooner rather than the final deadline date being the only date that anybody on that end seems to care about, so.
Yep. And then there's a little bit of balance we play with that as well, because we could really, when we estimate in those days, we could really put the screws to them, but then we obviously, if we do that and we say, okay, you only get 60 days a year instead of 100, you're gonna see that result in really high increase in bid prices as well. So we try to manage that based on what the average construction crew can do throughout a year.
Understood.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councilman Harvey had a question, and then Councilman.
Speaking about utilities, what's gonna happen on the entire project length concerning overhead electrical wires?
They are staying as is. So
Wonderful. Facetiously, I say that.
that line is a major transmission line for MPW, and that line will be staying. We've worked around it. They'll have some of the overhead, some of the crossing lines that serve the businesses. Those will be going away. We're working at undergrounding some of those conduit. That might not happen. We're putting the conduit in with the project. Some of the undergrounding may not happen until after the project, but we're putting the facilities in at least to be able to update some of the crossings for whether it be the house services, business services. Some of that will be underground, but the major transmission lines will be staying above ground.
So the local services, you're thinking ahead in a way that you can get as you say, the conduits in, so they don't have to tear up the.
Yep, MPW is looking at that, and they're a partner with us, and they're gonna have plans in our set as well for stuff that needs to be instructed for theirs, and that's one of the things they're doing, is looking at putting some of that conduit in, whether it's used now or in the future, it's there, so we don't have to tear the road up later.
Okay. Councilman Malcolm?
One additional question, I'm sitting here looking at the slide about the monuments. Is this project going to include monuments like that?
So we have two locations where we're going to have these. At the south end, at the trail crossing on Mississippi's, which is this one, we'll have gateway monuments on both sides of the roadway. Kind of welcoming, this is where the corridor starts. The feel of those monuments will be very similar to Mississippi Drive as far as size. So that'll be able to transform and continue on as they take this road all the way to Mississippi Drive. The other location will be at towards the right edge of the screen there, where you see some of those red squares. That's a plaza area. There'll be a kiosk there that's similar to the kiosks that we see on Mississippi Drive, but those will be the two locations that have those monuments.
So let me make sure I heard you correctly. They're gonna be on the side of the road.
Yes.
The reason why I'm saying that is because the one on Pine and Mississippi Drive is concerning me. It has a tendency, especially in the evening or late this time of night, to be a little obstructive.
Okay.
View.
Yep.
And it's sitting dead center of the street, so.
Yep, they're both gonna be on the edges.
Okay. I'm just curious. Thank you.
That's a good question.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Just one thing I wanted to add, I think it's important for the public to know that there will be construction occurring on this project this coming spring of our MPW for Alliant Energy. So it won't be in the roadway, but it will be on the sides, so where they're doing their work, their pre-work, if you will, to get ready for this construction project. The other thing to note is that timing-wise for construction, for letting this project, we have to have everything to the DOT by January 22nd in order to make an April bid letting. If for some reason that slips, we don't get everything that we need, or the DOT sends back plans, that pushes our bid letting back later into the fall. So if we bid it in April, we would award, we'd probably start construction sometime midsummer. If it goes to September bid letting, we probably wouldn't start anything until maybe December, and then do some work towards the end of the year, and then start over actually in the calendar year 2020, yeah, for getting to the end of the year. So I just want to make the council and public aware of that there is a potential of differing start dates, and we won't know that until we have all of our DOT approvals. So just want to make that clear.
So is it possible that some of the construction that's being done ahead of time by other entities could interfere with the bowling tournament?
Well, it won't interfere with the access because it's not in the roadway, so there should not be any no, there shouldn't be any conflicts there. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
I'm up here for the next one. I was just going to wait, but
Okay. Well, we're going to move right on to Lake Park then. Go right ahead.
okay. So we were asked by council after we had a heavy rainfall this last summer. We obviously have some issues with street flooding at Lake Park Avenue. So Pat Lynch, our assistant city engineer, I'll bring him up in a second, has done some work to go over several options for ways to hopefully alleviate those concerns. So that's what this next presentation is about. And once I get it here, I'll turn it over to Pat, and he should be able to answer any questions that you have. All right.
Hello, like Brian said, I'm Pat Lynch, the new assistant city engineer.
Welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Engineering was asked to look at the localized flooding issue on Lake Park Boulevard there. I've got a map up here showing the area. The Lake Park Boulevard is the gray line that you see through there. Mad Creek is the blue line that you see along the left. The two properties that are highlighted, the one on the left is All Steel and the one on the right is the DOT property. The drainage area that contributes to this localized flooding is approximately 140 acres. Of that 140 acres, 100 acres flows to that existing stream that flows through the DOT property and All Steel property, which leaves the remaining 40 acres to flow straight to the storm sewer system. The flooded area down by Lake Park Boulevard there, it floods to about 4 feet deep during a 100-year flood event, and stays flooded for about for about 3 hours during that 100-year event. There's a blow up of it right there. The red outline shows you where it floods to, shaded in blue there. So it does get up to the garages, but not in the garages.
Some people might disagree with that.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree with that.
Okay. So it might get in the garages.
Yeah.
Okay, and the amount of water that flows to this area during a 100-year event is about 550 cubic feet of water per second. The existing storm sewer system can handle 200 of that. So the rest of it flows over land, down into that bowl area, fills the bowl up, and then overflows to Mad Creek. The first thing we looked at was adding storm sewer to Lake Park Boulevard to see if that would alleviate the problem. A typical intake takes 5 to 10 cubic feet of water per second during the peak event. So that means you're adding 35 to 70 intakes along that stretch of roadway with the additional storm sewer. So there really isn't enough room nor enough money to increase the storm sewer to accommodate the flow. So the next thing we looked at was installing a detention pond on the DOT property. We looked into what flows to that area, and you have approximately 80 acres upstream of the detention pond that contribute to it. After running the calculations, the detention pond has a positive impact on that local stream. but minimal positive impact on the overall system. So what it does is it prolongs the flooding to 4 hours, but it still stays flooded 4 feet deep for 4 hours instead of 3, because the 40 acres actually inundate the storm sewer system already. So any additional water that's sent to that is going to increase the flooding, and a detention pond slows the flow down, so the flow is slowed down, so that's why the extended period of time. The detention pond would cost about $350,000 to build on that property as well, so the cost to benefit ratio really wasn't there either. So the next thing we looked at was installing a diversionary channel to divert that stream directly to Mad Creek. If the diversionary channel is constructed, the flooded area still floods, but it only gets 3 feet deep and for 30 minutes as opposed to 3 hours. But because the storm sewer, or the 40 acres inundates the storm sewer in that area, you still flood. And there's the difference in flooding. The red outline is still that existing 4 foot deep flooding from what it does now. The blue shaded area is what would flood if the diversionary channel was constructed. So then we looked at constructing a roadside ditch alongside of Lake Park Boulevard there, directly to Mad Creek, to try to create an overland flow path to essentially drain that tub. And what that did for us was it still floods to 4 feet deep, but it only floods for 20 minutes. So, and the cost to construct that that roadside ditch was just less than $100,000.
So what do you do at the bridge?
It's alongside the.
It would run alongside of
Right,
the
it would
bridge?
run, we would have a culvert underneath, I can't remember what that side street is, but it would go under that side street and then dump into Mad Creek.
Okay.
So any questions?
Yeah,
Councilman Harvey?
What was the cost of diversion?
About $500,000.
Bunch more.
Right. There's a ridge that you would be digging through. So it would be approximately 80 feet wide at the top of the ditch to get a 10-foot channel down at the bottom. So it's a lot of earthwork.
Go ahead.
So I had a question then. So we bought a $600,000 building that, property that we were told was gonna fix the flooding issue, and it will do absolutely nothing to the flooding issue. Is that correct?
It would have a positive impact locally, but on the overall system, it would have a minimal impact. That is correct.
That property that we purchased, though, won't do anything for that tub as it was called at the bottom of the hill?
Not by itself, but in conjunction with another one, it would help, but.
But there's no solution right now that'll prevent 4 feet of water from filling up that area, at least for some period of time.
Correct. The system was designed, typically the storm sewer systems are designed for the 5 to 10 year storm. So any event above the 5 to 10 year storm will fill up a roadway, but most systems are designed to have an overland flow path to a stream or a creek or whatnot, a river. This one was designed and it had a bowl sitting at the bottom, so it's, without having that overland flow path, it's very difficult to get any water that ponds in the street out of there.
I understand that. Yeah, and I think that, we need to start maybe looking at I realize we call it a 100-year flood, but I think the residents there would also have a difference of opinion on that. And regardless of what people feel about climate change, I think that, we need to take that into account. Yeah, I'm disappointed in the fact that I thought that we understood that this was going to provide a solution prior to purchasing that property, and that's a disappointing result.
Yeah, we were disappointed as well. We hadn't done all the calculations that Pat had run before we did the building, and there's other benefits to the property that we could discuss at a different time. I mean, yes, that part we were disappointed and surprised as well to find that out. What we've got here is a perfect case of development that has just, happened over the course of time. These places were built first, they were built low, everything develops above it, and the water goes to the low spot. It's unfortunate for the folks that live there and experience this. We are trying to come up with solutions. They're not easy solutions. They're not cheap solutions either. So we're working our way through that as best that we possibly can.
I would like a solution brought forward that fixes the flooding, just so we can at least see what it would be.
Yeah, there's some green infrastructure practices that we could look at in the 40 acres. The problem with this area is it's completely developed now.
Right.
So there's not a lot of free space to do anything where we could store water other than those 2 areas. I think Pat's done a great job of running the models on this so far. We will continue to look, and we don't have a recommendation tonight anyway. We just wanted to give you guys an update on what we had been doing with this. So we'll continue with that. We'll have a recommendation that we could bring forward at a later date, and then it'll be up to council to approve it and fund it at one point. So
I mean, I'd encourage you to get creative. If it involves, looking at purchasing one of the properties in that area that would maybe make it so that we could do something different. Look at something like that. I mean, let's step outside the box. Obviously, that's a broken area. I realize that it's not it's not anybody's fault that that is currently working on the solutions that it got that way. But it is the way it is, and we have to deal with it. So I would love to see something, and with more data crunched than we had when we made the decisions on that building, because that building got my vote eagerly because I was told that it was a solution to the flooding issue. So
we shall return. We'll take care of this as best we can.
I have a question.
Councilman Saucedo's been waiting. Go ahead.
What's the size of the sewer water tower that we have now?
The storm sewer pipe that outlets into Mad Creek is a 48-inch.
It's a 48-inch, and you said that
Carries about 200 cubic feet per second at the slope that it runs.
So with the diversion program or diversion of a line that you would do, would we need to report anything to the DNR as far as now we're sending a lot more water through there?
You're not sending more water there, you're just sending it directly to there on a different path. So it's the same water that goes there now, it's just you're putting it in a few hundred feet upstream.
Okay, that's all I have.
Councilman Fitzgerald?
If this pipe you're gonna run from the low, I assume from the low spot over to
Correct.
Mad Creek, what if Mad Creek is running, full?
The diversion, or that.
Is it gonna run backwards and then we're gonna end up filling up this area, even when just Mad Creek's just running full?
No, the roadside ditch wouldn't be, it's only gonna be 5 feet deep from the roadway surface. So it's not gonna get down below the bridge itself. It runs through.
Okay.
It just runs it all out into the flat area before it runs down in. We'll rip-wrap the flat area. And
So what would be the opportunity of going in there and there's a couple houses along that side. There's one closest to Mad Creek that's when Mad Creek went mad, he had issues, his shed was gone and all kinds of stuff numerous years ago. The other two are setting lower, where the basements are. Mm-hmm. Is there a possibility that we'd jack them up?
Well, we can look into that.
The
I mean,
street.
you may be better off with just a flood buyout program and
Yeah.
removing those and creating green space. That would be a council decision, obviously, as well. We can look into that. I don't know what we don't have a FEMA map for that creek, I don't believe. We can look into that, though, and see what type of programs are eligible for that. That might be the most inexpensive solution. Obviously, people don't like that, but that's something that we may have to look into.
Well, maybe they can have their house moved to a different location.
Right, and like I said, we've come up with 3 options so far. We're not done yet, and we will be back, like I said, but that's certainly something we could consider.
Councilman Spread?
Yeah, I just have a question. You talked about the roadside ditch, you talked about the detention pond. Did you consider the impact of doing both?
we did not run any models for both, but putting 2 together would make a significant increase. I would have to run the models to see if it eliminated flooding.
Right. Just an option.
Right.
Councilman Harvey has one more.
going to the one extreme, yes. How big of a pumps would you need to drain that bathtub at the worst?
Too big to, and too costly to even consider at this point.
Thank
I
you.
might encourage you in your scenarios is to give the council an estimate if we're to,
Okay.
there's probably 4 homes, just buying them out.
Like I said, that's something that we'll consider and bring back. You know, the other thing we'd like to recommend just for the public is if that area if it's raining hard, you know, that area fills up, don't drive through that. You know, don't turn around and go different route. But that was one of the issues we had too, is floating some cars there, and that is the low spot in that whole area. So we know it's a problem area, and we'll do what we can.
Thank you. I assume the next one's you too, Brian.
Yeah, I'm just living up here tonight.
Yeah.
So, the last one, hopefully you guys all had a chance to look at this. I really don't have much to add. I'm happy to answer any questions. This is just the plan that I've come up with for succession planning, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Otherwise, if you're okay with it, we will start implementing it.
Anybody have any comments, questions,
Just- I
concerns?
think it's a good job that you're
Looks
looking
good.
outside the box here and coming up with ways to be creative for the budget, and
Thank you.
applaud you on the good work on this.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Although, Brian, were you looking to implement this in January?
Correct. So
So
do we need a motion for that, or?
council would need to act on the pay plan prior to, well, as soon as possible, but in January. And Nancy's worked with Brian and has a breakdown of the overall cost that you can look there based on general fund and the various funds. I think overall it was a decrease, but you got to look at each fund. Each fund is slightly different. So while it's an overall decrease, it depends on the fund.
Correct. But I guess I'm not clear. Do you want me to present a memo for next week's meeting then to enact this, or how do we do that?
You'll need to catch Stephanie and make, I believe, changes to the pay plan.
Okay.
I'd look forward to seeing that on the next agenda so we can vote on it.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Councilman Brackett, would you like to update us on the ad hoc committee?
Yes, I don't really have anything besides what's in the attachment. We met, and as stated in the attachment, we did not determine that there were any specific issues with the process. As such, we, while we did, you know, as it states there, that a number of us had numerous contacts with contractors, developers, and property owners who had expressed dissatisfaction with developing and/or managing properties in the city of Muscatine. So what we recommend is that and I'm speaking as a representative of the ad hoc committee at this point to the council, we recommend that the council direct staff to enable a process to obtain feedback on the services provided by the city for building permits and inspections. This is something that we've talked about before as well, so hopefully there's some progress made there already, but this feedback will provide an understanding of customer satisfaction and opportunities for improvement. The committee suggests the use of a third party to garner this feedback. It is our hope that this will allow staff to develop a plan to resolve whatever issues exist. We were provided an activity report for our purposes, which we're not really able to use due to the outputs from the system. We would recommend a review of this tool to determine the actual report outputs possible, and if need be, the acquisition of a new tool. I'll add on top of that it wasn't the most user-friendly setup. There were some additional requests for information or access that we had made that were not able to be provided. That was not something that seemed like a choice, just a limitation of the software. So at this time, it's also a recommendation that the council disbands the ad hoc committee as the limited scope of inquiry has been exhausted. So that is our report.
Questions?
A number of years ago, Your Honor, we tried the National Citizen Survey, which was a comprehensive survey of all city services. Now, that was not budgeted for in the following year, and it doesn't have to be done every year, but it is a comprehensive survey that provides comparisons to hundreds of communities across the nation. There's other surveys. I believe Bettendorf does an annual survey. I believe Ankeny does an annual survey of their own. I don't believe it's part of the National Citizen Survey. But that was something that the City Council chose not to pursue. And if I recall, please don't, at the time, I believe that cost was around $7,500 to $10,000 per year, depending on the options that you chose to participate in. And that would give you, whether you did that every year or every third year or whatever the city chose to do, an option to not only look at one department, but all departments, and provide feedback on city services and provide comparisons to other communities.
Sure.
So that's something I would encourage you. You just type in National Citizen Survey and it'll pop up, and maybe that's something that we need to revisit. I can also pull out that old report and provide a copy of that for you to look at to see what we received at the time.
I'm not familiar with it, so I would like to see it. Because we do need to get the, figure out what is causing such dissatisfaction amongst developers in the area, because I've had a few of them tell me.
My biggest concern with individual surveys, and I know some communities have done them, Cedar Rapids used to have them on about every web page, and I believe they've taken them off every web page now. I want to take a look at that. People that are generally happy with the services don't typically respond. It's typically those that have a different experience that respond. Oftentimes, for example, with the National Citizen Survey, the fire department typically receives a higher score than the police department, because your typical interaction with the police department is not the annual picnic or the annual party. It is receiving a ticket after whatever activity it may have been. So I guess I caution us on those types of surveys. There are experts out there, and you do note an outside third party that because it's an art form to write surveys and get good responses back. So I'd encourage, maybe as a first step, to take a look at the National Citizen Survey.
So we can review that if that's something that's optional. I think our concern from the ad hoc group was just in the review that we had 6 months ago, where Steve Boca and Dave Gobin had presented to us with their team. No feedback was ever given from that department in the last 40 years plus. Survey-wise.
Yeah.
And when we think about what services we're providing, basically we're providing a service for developers, homeowners, businesses, rental inspections, whatever it may be. But we never provide feedback. So obviously there may be feedback that is very negative, if that's the case as you're mentioning. What we're after is constructive feedback that can help identify maybe areas of improvement, looking for ways that we're maybe doing things well. This is truly something that we are trying to do, is how can we develop our team to be stronger than what we are now?
Absolutely.
That is more what we're trying to target. So I would encourage that perception of what we're trying to look at, to make sure the feedback is constructive, hopefully team building, and a way of collaborating as a team to try to build our community to be stronger as far as what we're doing.
For example, I have a listserv that I participate in with other managers. I'll certainly send something out to see what other communities are using.
If there's a tool that's available, there's different surveys that's available, or would you say National Citizen Survey, if that's something. I think the long-term view is to eventually get feedback from all of the departments, but ideally this ad hoc group was identified to try to target this certain area of improvement, and that is what we're trying to give feedback as council.
Absolutely. Bettendorf, I know for sure, and Ankeny, I know for sure. You can look on their websites and see what they've done for their surveys. So
okay.
I appreciate the feedback.
Thank you. We have had to cancel number 7 for the evening. We will have that regarding the CVB. We will have that at a future date. And the next thing on our agenda is a presentation from some local citizens group on the port authorities. And I believe we have Carl Reichert, Jason Legis, and Duffy DeFrance. You might have to bend that microphone down.
So, or get me a stepladder. Thank you, Mayor Broderson and members of the City Council for giving me this opportunity to present to you a proposal which could help to solve some of the problems our city is presently facing. What I am proposing is the creation of a port authority as described and made possible by the laws of the state of Iowa. What is a port authority? It is an organization created by a minimum of 2 government organizations, corporations, for the purpose of operating ports on bodies of water and other forms of transportation, such as the America Central Port at Granite City, Illinois, as an example. Such a corporation is in effect owned by these 2 government organizations, and its board of directors can be appointed by these organizations also. Muscatine Power and Water presents a great example of such a community governmental business structure. There has been some talk of the possibility of a public-private partnership. The question of what would this do to our taxes is always on the minds of the members of City Council and the citizens of Muscatine. I feel a port authority developed as a private partnership would require taxpayers to have to invest in the partnership. Such a form of organization could create more problems than it could solve. Instead, having 2 governmental organizations control the port authority, and because of the laws that govern a port authority, there would be no increase in property taxes. This undertaking of a port authority could bring much needed new people, new resources to our community. It would help in creating new businesses, generate new job opportunities, and be an incentive to create a more prosperous downtown. The long-term effect of undertaking this proposal would help to bring solutions to some of the issues in our community, such as increasing affordable housing and addressing our declining school enrollment. We all want growth for Muscatine, and this would get the momentum going with opportunities of working with many surrounding communities and companies. There is a great need for using bulk shipments in large containers to transport goods such as grain, building materials, and other manufactured products from our area down the Mississippi to the rest of the world. Due to our key location on the Mississippi River, we are in a unique position for a port authority. This would allow us to be more competitive with other Iowa and Illinois communities of the same size. I propose that the City Council send a request to the Planning and Zoning Commission for study and development of recommendations for implementation of a plan for a port authority creation in Muscatine. Number 2, I propose that the City Council ensure that the city televise over the government channel all meetings and communications pertaining to this issue. I propose that the City Council authorize planning and zoning to seek information from the public on this issue. And finally, I propose that the City Council request that the Planning and Zoning Commission respond back to the Council in time to have the report included in the 2019 and 2020 goals of the city. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Mayor, Council,
Yes.
I'll just kind of be brief about some of the advantages I think that could happen as part of this public partnership with the Port Authority. It would be an entity that would represent not just, residents here in Muscatine, but the needs of residents and businesses throughout the Muscatine region. Doing something that would be able to promote future growth and development, not just now, but decades from now. And it'd be one that would not just be open to just even the existing businesses, which we want to promote and produce, but also could be a really big attraction for potential new businesses and industry and the people who are going to work for them. And this is probably going to be a long process. I mean, it was a long debate 118 years ago when the entity now known as Muscatine Power and Water first came into being, and there was a lot of talk about whether or not a public entity could provide fresh water for its citizens, but that worked, and then it's continued on since then. Muscatine used to be a port city in the past. It could definitely be that here in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Threw my back up today. Thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council. I wanted to recommend that the Port Authority be taken a serious look at, because it offers opportunities for the city of Muscatine to grow in both employment, in fixed assets, taxable properties, so on and so forth. The power of a Port Authority is defined in Chapter 28 J-9 in the Code of Iowa. And there's been a few subtle rumors around Muscatine about, okay, as an example, if we were to do a Port Authority, it could possibly raise taxes. Part 10 of that chapter, 28J.9, specifically refuses or outlaws the Port Authority to raise taxes. It is exempted completely from that. So that's not even an issue. The Port Authority would have powers to issue bonds, revenue bonds. It would have powers to work with the Corps of Engineers. It would have power to seek grants and seek aid from the Corps. It has all those powers to request this. This is another key ingredient, because the Port Authority is no simple undertaking. And this is the reason that we were hoping that we could go to, that you council would see to go to the City Council. There are several things that has to occur that are very critical in its initial and original organization. One is you can't do it alone. The city of Muscatine has to have another city to go along with them. Minimum of 2 government political entities or corporations have to fill the Port Authority. That's the minimum. You could have more cities, or even perhaps the county. And this would require, again, a huge undertaking. And this is also the reason that the televising of the Planning and Zoning Commission meetings, I think, should be done, because it's going to have to get to more than just the people of Muscatine. And this is a very critical part as well. The Port Authority is given just about as much power as you have as a municipality. There are a few restrictions on it. The Port Authority has its own separate board, similar to that of Muscatine Power and Water. You people here are the owners of Muscatine Power and Water, and you've delegated your authority to appointing a board. But the city of Muscatine owns Muscatine Power and Water. This would be pretty much the same example with the Port Authority, except that not only would you own it, but another municipality could own it as well, because you would appoint board members, they would appoint board members, and the Port Authority would be then governed by that board, similar to Muscatine Power and Water. The Port Authority also does not have eminent domain. It's not given that power. The way, if that were to raise its ugly face to be a requirement, would have to be done is they have to come back to you as the City Council, and you have to exercise your power for eminent domain. So again, this is something that has to be kept quite public. Why I recommend, and I urge you people to please send it to Planning and Zoning, let them study it, because as I said, it's no simple deal, nor was Power and Water. But Muscatine is rather unique, because we have had some tremendous people here. Maybe some of them have been recognized, some haven't. I could go down a list of people from Muscatine. Did you know the president of the World Bank is a Muscatine High School graduate, as an example? Did you know that Muscatine had a person graduate from here that was practically in charge of Area 51? Went through Muscatine High School. We have a lot of tremendous people here. The other thing is that Muscatine is unique from its industry that's here, because name any other city of 23,000 that had most of its major employers start up here. And that in itself is a huge positive thing. So it can be done. The city could do it, and I think it would do nothing but benefit everybody if you would do it. And the only way to get it started is to send it to planning and zoning, let them study it, because not only do you have to buy it, other people have to also. Have any questions on it?
Council?
Where would you be thinking of it going?
I'm sorry?
Where would you think it would go? Location?
That would be determined at some time after the Port Authority was up and in running.
Would that be one of their tasks?
I think there's one major criteria that would be worked out with the Corps of Engineers. One of the reasons that Muscatine's so desirable is because we are about as far north as you're going to get, where the Mississippi River doesn't get frozen up all winter. If you go up north, if you go to Dubuque, they can't compete with us. Neither can Cedar Rapids or Iowa City, because they're not on the Mississippi. The other thing that's kind of unique is the channel, the 9-foot channel, is on our side of the river. And this makes it a tremendous advantage, because there may even be a point to use the old, simple, old-fashioned thing called bubbling to keep the barges free. What is the most difficult thing, which may require some U.S. government funding, is that they may have to bubble the locks for them to get downriver, because we still have to go through Boston and some locks. Granite City is in the St. Louis area. They did, from one article that I just read, about $1.1 billion in business last year. I mean, this is huge in its concept. And it, properly handled, can become huge and make Muscatine grow, increase employment, and do everything else with it. And this is the reason I would recommend that you at least get it to planning and zoning.
I think I have a question on it. Wouldn't this require like a railroad yard to be established for this? Because some of the stuff that's would go to this probably wouldn't come always by truck, it would come by rail, since we have trains going through here anyway.
Yes, it would. It would require, and from the people I've talked to run the existing Port Authority, or existing port authorities, much larger than ours would ever be, it requires rail, and it requires specialized equipment. It requires the equipment to be able to load containers, to be able to load bulk, to be able to load liquids. And all of that has to be included with it. The thing that could be, again, depending upon the infrastructure and the organization of the Port Authority, would be that you can, excuse the expression, pay as you go. If we were to attract an industry that loaded 650,000 gallons of purified water to be bottled in New Orleans or in Amsterdam, then we would have to have the facilities for that to be able to handle it. If we had facilities that required, as an example, I shouldn't bring this up, I suppose, but as an example, if we have corn can be loaded today, and the Port Authority could do it much more efficiently. Containers, would West Liberty Food put a reefer container on a barge to ship it down to overseas? Presently, Muscatine has some companies that are shipping internationally right now out of here. They could expand. But yeah, you have to have rail, and from what other people recommend, that you have 2 rails. Because apparently a couple of the very large ports in California, when its inception, found that one railroad company got much more competitive when there became another rail company. So these are the things that the Port Authority has got to address, handle, resolve, if it's going to be successful. This is why I said also, it's no small undertaking, but the rewards on it would be extremely great.
And what, I guess my comment on that would be, I'd kind of thought that we were working towards some kind of planning on that, and then it dropped off at some point. So I would be curious to have a report from planning and zoning to kind of bring us up to speed on where that stopped. The last information that had gotten was that it was strictly a private interest at this point, but I'm curious as to why, from a municipal standpoint, we've dropped interest, because the Port Authority concept was something that did interest me when it came up initially. So I would like to have more information on that.
I don't think the city's ever studied the Port Authority concept. We had the report from HDR, correct? Right. That was brought forward. And we have a
Spent
local,
money on it at one point.
and we have and that was brought forward to city council. The city staff and planning and zoning has never studied the concept of a port authority. There's been no study on that. There has been a local company that is pursuing we'll call it a port or business opportunity. And the city, as we discussed during the goal sessions, would be one entity where infrastructure would be our key component to help get infrastructure for that street, water, sewer, along with water to the county park as well.
I sat through a presentation in the basement of the county building over there. God, when was
Oh boy, that was a couple years ago.
Couple
Dave,
years
you
ago,
did that.
Where the direction of that was fairly open, and talked about the research being done to determine what was going to be, built, and it was very much presented as a city project. So I would like to, maybe revisit that somewhat and find out what opportunities the city might have if we were to follow a path such as this, and what the roadblocks are.
The study's recommendation was for a port commission working with a private entity, public-private partnership, where the city's role is basically infrastructure, helping to get grants. Now, the private entity wouldn't necessarily have to get grants. They could fund that on their own. But the recommendation of the study was a port commission, which is basically a board that would help find grants, support the port, and that private entity. That was a recommendation that came from that study that was done.
Do we have that study on the website?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I might also add that there is no reason under the sun the Port Authority, as organized, could not work with those people, and together they could accomplish the same task, only it would be much better organized and much longer term if it were a Port Authority.
Could you lay out what the benefits would be in going the Port Authority route rather than a different type of oversight?
Benefits is sort of like the Ben Franklin list. A Port Authority has many, many powers. It has the power to sell revenue bonds, which the private portion of a public-private partnership could buy, which would finance it, or buy the bonds. It has the power to work with and borrow money, sell bonds, buy and sell real estate. It has basically all the powers you, the city, has, with the exception that it can't mess with taxes or eminent domain. Those are two are specifically addressed in the legislation. The other thing that gives us is tremendous is if you do a public-private partnership, then you have to take a look at the private portion to see what they could do. All right, in other words, if a Port Authority is capable of handling 100% of everything that comes into it, but the local company that's done the private partnership, if their total production only gives you 10% of the use of the port, what's the other 90 goes for and who pays for it? So this is some of the advantages of a Port Authority. Plus, the Port Authority has many, many longevities that a privately held enterprise has. A privately held enterprise will continue to strive until such time as they no longer make a pocket or profit, or if they are sold or merged with other people. So there's a lot of change that can occur, and you've got to have an entity that can address the change better. And that's why, it shouldn't be the city council here or another city council, but simply to have a unified, look at Power and Water. How many hundred, they're over 100 years old, and they've changed. They started out with water, they went to electricity, they're into high-speed fiber optics right now, and I'm sure that you, all of us sitting here, will see them change again. But it's all to the benefit of Muscatine.
Other questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was just gonna say.
Go ahead.
I kind of echo Kelsey's comments a little bit, that right or wrong, I thought, you know, a couple of years ago when we first started talking about that, it was going to be, Muscatine was going to be involved with a port authority, and then, as Kelsey said, it kind of dropped off the edge of the table or something, and I don't know what happened. Either somehow we misinterpreted what the interest of the city was, or it wasn't there to begin with, and I don't know why, you know, why was that study even made if the city wasn't interested in sponsoring, if you will, a port authority?
I mean, we can certainly revisit the results of the study itself.
I would think we should start there. Let's
And
dust
that
off the
may be a
study
good starting
and
point.
get familiar with the context. A port authority is another layer of government. It's another governmental unit. It may be useful, but we don't know that yet because you need a project.
Which is why I think it does make sense to
You
have
gotta
planning and
have
zoning look
you
at
gotta
it.
have the project that it fits with. I don't see any point creating another layer of government for the sake of having one. There needs to be a goal and a project and something we're trying to accomplish. We don't have that today.
I do know that in our recent goals, until we did a little word correction, it specifically said develop port in there. So I mean, that was something that wasn't changed until we, you know, revisited that, I think, here at the last meeting. So, I mean, obviously develop port is something that has been in the goals of the city by the city council for longer than, you know, me saying this tonight. I mean, it's something that was in the documentation that was presented, you know, over a year ago at least, if not before that. And so, I mean, if that explains why there's some confusion as to why I read it a certain way, why some others have read it a certain way, I think that explains it. It said develop port. So, you know, I would like planning and zoning to come back and maybe explain some things a little bit more to us, and maybe we'll have some more questions before then. I'm not asking for the next meeting, but I do think that we need to look at it and see.
Why are we talking about planning and zoning?
Yeah.
I don't understand why.
That's a disconnect for me too. I don't get it. Why them?
They haven't even been involved in this process. I mean,
Dave was the one that gave the presentation.
Right, but it wasn't planning and zoning.
Community,
It was just simply the department. It was the city that hired the firm to do the study.
Okay.
The study was paid for by an outside third party, Kent Corporation.
In its entirety?
We received a grant. They paid. It was an $80,000 grant, and they paid the $20,000 match, I believe, for the study. Is that the correct number?
That's way off.
Does that sound right?
No, it was a $100,000 study.
That's what I said. $100,000 study. 80-20, wasn't it?
They paid. The state paid 80, and the private entity paid 20. City didn't pay anything.
I'm sorry. That's what I meant. Yes.
So about $80,000 in taxpayers' money went to.
State grant.
State grant. So
yeah, taxpayers' money.
Yeah. Taxpayers' money. Okay. Actually, the money came in from railroad fees.
Okay.
All right. So, in a sense, it's collected money from the state from the railroad.
I think part of the comments that I received and shared about the study was that instead of it being a valid feasibility study where it looked at all of the opportunities of what type of authority it would be and who would do it and how it would work, it was started with some preconceived decisions and hopes for how they wanted it to be, and then the study was tailored after those. And so it wasn't a true report that really did an in-depth study like the city administrator just said. Nobody ever even looked at the possibility of a Port Authority before.
No, but a Port Authority is described in there. The recommendation was a Port Commission.
Because that was what was said at the beginning, that you wanted it to be.
Well, we had the complex,
We didn't even know what a Port Commission was at the beginning of the study, so that, I mean, that's not even a valid comment.
That's not what Mr. Gobin said earlier. Go
Public-
ahead.
Well, there was 6 different governance models that were studied. And that one of them was a public port authority, and the other, the others were about additional, I'm gonna give you a sense of them. Municipal ports, state ports, quasi-governmental ports and commissions, public ports, port councils, additional port models, and it comes down to this: the additional port models sum it up pretty well. You have publicly owned and managed, which is what a port authority would do and operate. Here's another one that could be done, was publicly owned, second party managed and operated. Or third bullet here is publicly owned, but be a public or a port authority, agent managed and third party operated. Or the fourth bullet, which is the facility is privately owned and operated. We have not been going down the path of a port authority because the complexity is that it's private property that wants to be developed as a port, intermodal container port, for that to be specific. So therefore, we didn't go down the path of a port authority. If you want to get a study done just of port authorities, that's not hard to do. It's just a matter of cutting and pasting out of Iowa code, federal DOT code, marine highway codes. It's just a matter of getting all that information into one report.
So I have a question then, based on what you just said. So then the study was specifically tailored to a very exact piece of land?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was.
Only to a privately owned piece of land?
Well, it looked at a bunch of different properties, and this seemed to be the most appropriate property. It's about a half mile, or no, maybe a quarter of a mile of straight shoreline. And that it lended itself best for construction of a port. And that's the reason why they chose that.
And there's no section of publicly owned land or any other.
No, the only other place that had a second option was the Monsanto property, which they used to have the ability to load things there, but they had abandoned that site, and they didn't show or express any real interest in developing that site into it. Between there and the Kent site, it's all owned by parts and pieces of different people.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. There's many different property owners through there.
Right. I think there's about 3 or 4 in that direct section.
And now you're into the county as well.
Right. So I would say I'm more than willing to go back and look at that study. This topic really hadn't jumped forward for me for a while until our goal setting session, and then having the wording on there. And then I had not had a chance due to my schedule to really dig into that a whole lot. And then I saw this group was coming forward tonight, but I didn't really know what they were going to talk about, so I figured I would wait.
Right. It's summarized down to what Greg was mentioning, and that is the private side is that it's on their nickel to build the port. But they're going to do it in concert with our ability to go raise some grant funds to build the infrastructure from the shoreline to 61. And second thing, I don't think you mentioned this, the second thing we've been doing is gathering the interest primarily from the Quad Cities and Clinton, and also down in the Burlington area. that has been gathering their interest that this becomes a regional port and has a attraction that way. I think we've been fairly successful in getting that support from all these larger communities around us, that this is a good place. And I don't disagree with a lot of what was said by the public people that came up and talked publicly about this, that this is a very unique opportunity. We've been going slow primarily because we don't want to put our infrastructure dollars ahead of building something before they build it. You know,
Have they even decided yet?
well, they have, they're studying some economic
Right.
information, and then they're drilling down right now. So I have not, and quite frankly, given my health situation and a couple other things, I have not necessarily been push her thumb in the back like I do on most projects. This was one I've been backed off because Osama died, and remember all that?
Right, right.
And I was working pretty closely with him on that project. So it's a matter now of getting it moving, momentum again.
Sure.
But when we do, that's the role currently. Then we put together this commission of which we'll participate in, and the private company will participate in. We don't necessarily have to have another governmental agency involved in their making decisions for what we want to do.
But wouldn't it give more oversight? I mean, if we are only going to be involved, and we have a great deal of staff time already in this project.
That's primarily been me.
Yeah, but a lot of it.
Yeah.
But if this is going to end up being a private port with us just being involved with the infrastructure and the roads, then we're going to have no say at all. We're not going to have any kind of opinions about how things should be. And wouldn't it be better to go with a port authority who's going to create that oversight and make sure that it's fair for everyone and everything is done appropriately? I mean, why would we be so supportive of just a private entity when we are going to not have any stake in it at all?
I'm afraid that we're going to scare off our current partner. And then we'd end up having to do this all on our own or with another entity like Fruitland. I don't know, just picking the name. But the point is that's what I'm afraid of. We start having to then incorporate another municipality into this. And then we're on our own to find our own property, build our own port, run this thing. And you, like you say, basically guide ourselves to do this stuff. Quite frankly, I'm not quite sure we're ready to do that.
That brings me back to what I was saying earlier. I would like to see a feasibility study that's open-ended instead of going into a feasibility study saying we want to enter into a private-public partnership with Kent Feeds at this location. Will that work? Instead of going into it with the tabula rasa saying what are our options. I would think that would be very
Well, you want the same thing for the Port Authority, right?
or any governance.
Okay.
I mean, I just think going into a feasibility study saying what would be the options.
I'm open to that evaluation. Greg, do you think we could get our city attorneys involved, or one attorney involved in that discussion?
I think that's more of a bond council discussion rather
Okay,
than
so
a
we'll be
city
with
city
that.
attorney discussion, but.
Well, he's an attorney.
I mean, the city council budgeted for that study, and that was done and approved, or the study was approved by the council, and then it was completed by HDR after extensive survey. There's two firms, HDR, they do a lot of the inland marine or inland marines, and then there's a second firm that I can't think of the name of that does a lot of the ports that are marine or ocean related.
don't
I
ask
can't think of
me.
their name right now.
I can't remember them either.
Right.
But it's on the tip of my tongue.
Yep. So,
hey,
I mean, but the
I'm
council
open
went
to-
through a process of budgeting for that, and, you know, so if that's something the council wishes to do and discuss budget, and if there's a majority
Well,
of
it
council
would
that wishes to
actually-
proceed.
Actually, it would be a good instructions on how to move forward. The way I'm seeing it, based on the way you described it, if it gives us a full valuation of here's what you should do and do next and that kind of things, is that, you know, as you evaluate it from the city's perspective, that would be valuable. I think have value.
For $100,000 or how much?
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, that would determine the value is what I'm asking.
All right.
Any other questions?
To me, I think you wait and see if you have a private entity that's willing to move forward, so that you don't have a public investment of $20 to $40 million or whatever it may be. If you have a private entity that's willing to put that investment in, and you have a public entity that's willing to work with that private entity to look for grants and public infrastructure dollars to get that done, to me, it makes more sense to see if that proceeds. If it doesn't proceed, then you look at other opportunities. Personally.
Yeah, we kind of have to lock down the guy now, you know, so that we know you're the guy. You're the one we brought to the dance. So, what dances do you do?
So could you get us a copy? Or
It's
it's on
on the website.
On our
already?
city's
Yep.
website.
It is.
That's right, okay.
Would
Thank
you like me to look up the link and then I can send the email out so it's a little easier for you?
Sure.
To find it, because it is.
Send a
It's
link.
not like it was there a while ago, but I'm not quite sure exactly what the link
It's there,
is.
yeah, but yeah, we can send it out.
We can
Send the link.
just send the email out with the link.
Sure.
So
And Malcolm, go ahead.
my question here is, how do we know that this private entity, 6 months from now or a year from now, are still gonna be interested in doing this? And are we gonna be in mothballs while this is going? Is there a way for us to say, so many days, we need to know what your intentions are? I mean, I don't want it to be like, that building in Fifth and, you know, on the corner there.
Right.
I don't want to hear that. I mean, we're going to talk about that building too next time. But I don't want it to be open-ended. I want to know
But I
we're
don't-
going in this direction.
How can
and
you
we're not.
require that information? This is private property
Well-
and private enterprise.
Well, that was the
And what-
first thing we just said.
What demand do you want to make on that?
Let him finish.
Well, we just said, we want to know, is there other property that could be considered? This one person's property, that's nice, but you don't have to put your house there, you can put the house over here. I mean, and they said already, there's a place where Monsanto, I think you said used to be, or something that possibly could be discussed and looked at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's in the county, though. I just make sure that you understand.
Yeah, okay, so the county, but the fact is this person planning to move forward? Is this still on their table? Have they taken it back off because of whatever financial reasons are? Where are we with this? You know,
I believe we can develop a timetable.
yeah, that's what I said, is there some?
That would give us some time to know exactly where we are in milestones, that kind of stuff, that may answer your questions. Just-
Yeah, I don't want it to be open-ended. I want to know,
Right.
do we know where we're going with this, or have you changed your mind?
Right, well, if it gets to the point where we're actually constructing our infrastructure, we want to make sure we also have agreements in place that they're going.
No, this, I'm talking about even before we start doing any of that. I just want to know, is this still something you're planning to do? I was planning to buy a
That's
new
part of
shirt and a
that
tie
list.
last weekend, but I changed my mind. You know,
Yeah.
maybe next week, I'm not sure.
Got it. I got it.
More talking to do on this, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
But there's nothing else on tonight's agenda, so Councilman Spread, do you have anything you'd like to share tonight?
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Councilman Malcolm?
Yes, I'd like to thank my friends at Public Works. I see the new flag hanging. Yay. I also like to thank you. I saw the handicap parking in front of my spot. That was a problem. I did bring up something in the meeting when we were talking with the engineers, the thing on Pine and Mission Ave and Mississippi Drive, that monument marker at the middle of this, it actually takes away some of your vision. I don't know, maybe you guys need to look at it and see if there's something we could do, because driving up and down Mississippi Drive, it's nice, it looks good, but it also takes away some of your vision as you're driving up and down Mississippi Drive, even though we're driving at 25. I just want to note that got my attention. Other people said stuff to me too, which made me pay attention. But that's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Councilman Harvey.
Nothing tonight, Your Honor.
Councilman Fitzgerald.
Nothing at this time.
Councilwoman Brockert.
Yes, Riverbend Neighbors will meet with the mayor's group on Saturday at Ellie's at 9 a.m. Since I'm still a little inconvenienced, I don't do nighttime driving right now.
Thank you. Councilman Saucedo.
I don't have anything, Your Honor.
Councilman Brackett.
I was just gonna say that I'm not going to have, my fourth Saturday office hours this month with, the holiday falling right there next to that. So, other than that, I don't have anything.
Staff.
Just to note that that intersection was looked at by Bolton and Mink, and I believe that monument was moved back from its original location, and they also did a study to take a look at that original some time ago, and there was sufficient line of sight based on its new location. So they had looked at that several months back.
You go, but they probably have young eyes like you. Old people like me, we need a little bit more room here.
It was in my way the other day when I went to take a left turn, and I couldn't tell if there was traffic. I couldn't.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. I think if it had been located on the side of the road like the other ones are, I mean, it's very tastefully done. I like it. It's very nice, but just the location of it just got my attention. I don't know if we can put it on the side by the tracks, but I think that's railroad property. And I know on the other side is that building, button factory or something, that it's unusual, but where it is now, it's a little problematic. And, for younger people like me with my eyes and bifocals, that got my attention.
I just have a couple things. I've had a lot of people concerned about the leaf pickup, and I know we've been talking about that, and it's been in the paper. I just want to remind folks that, of course, the weather played a big role in them getting behind, and now they're getting back on track. They're going to spend another week or two working on picking up the leaves. But if you get missed, you can call in, and they'll come around and take care of your leaves. We had a wonderful holiday stroll on Friday night, great tree lighting ceremony, lots of folks walking up and down the street, visiting, going in and out of the establishments. I think it was a huge success, and a big shout out and thanks to all of those that were involved in putting that on for everyone. Our city next week is Writing for Success, and Dr. Reby with the Community School District. And like Councilwoman Brockert said, we'll have coffee with the mayor, 9 a.m. at Ellie's on Saturday. Thank you all for coming. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We're adjourned.